Welcome to this technical assistance for KyCL. That's the Kentucky Comprehensive Literacy Program. It's a grant that the RFA has been released and it is now available for application. We have we've had some technical assistance in general, but this is a specific technical assistance around evaluating programs and interventions that an applicant may want to include in their application. My name is Jackie Rogers. I am the grant coordinator. If you have questions between now and March 20th, you do need to direct those questions to kderfp@education.ky.gov. We're going to be talking about evidence-based practices and the requirements that we have. You may be in your school district very familiar with ESSA or Kentucky requirements, maybe around TSI and CSI schools. Talking about evidence-based practices and those requirements may be something that's very familiar to you, or it might be something that is new. So I want this conversation, you'll know that this is coming from a very basic level. What it's really going to offer you are lots of resources where you may go to find out more about how to make your best choices and how to make a submission for a program you may want to choose for your grant. And it has to be based on evidence. The characteristics of an evidence-based activity, strategy, intervention, we can go ahead and say provider, program, is that it's supported by a preponderance of scholarly literature, which is really very important when we're talking about finding, if we're talking about vetting something and also if we're approving something, we do want it to have this evidence that's behind it from a reputable source. One of the reasons that would be one of the top things on there is lots of times when we look at a program, for instance, or an intervention, it may seem really too good to be true, probably because the publisher or the person that is selling that has done a lot of the research and has done a lot of the getting the information out. So we're going to offer some guidance today on where to look for evidence and for research. It also should have been studied using a study design that measures the impact of that program, strategy, intervention, etc. The results should be supported by statistical analysis. Research compares the achievement of a control group to an intervention group. So that's something else you should be looking for as a characteristic of an evidence-based activity or provider or program. It is also not overridden by more recent or more rigorous research. We're talking about evidence-based, which falls within that category of research. There's also going to be a research-based, but when we're talking about evidence, we're saying that it's founded in the demonstration of statistically significant effect on improving student outcomes, that there is a basis there of evidence that shows an improvement of student outcomes. That's our goal in everything we do, is to improve student outcomes. And so we're basing our decisions on that kind of good evidence. Now, with our grant, and some of you may be familiar with the Striving Readers Grant, and now we have this Comprehensive Literacy Grant that the RFA is out right now. You can find that RFA, by the way, at the website that's listed here. Or you can go to Google and type in KDE competitive grants. And this right now is at the top of the page. And in just a moment, I'm going to take you to the website and I'm going to show you where all of these things can be found. But inside the RFA on page 6, you'll find a matrix of providers that have been grant approved. So when we wrote this application to the U.S. Department of Ed, we did looked at our evidence base and made decisions about which providers and which programs we were going to include on that list. I'm going to show you that matrix here in just a second. You'll also find an allowance for other programs and interventions outside the matrix with this grant. But to choose something outside the matrix, it has to be justified and approved for this grant by KDE. Here's what the matrix looks like inside the RFA. Now, what you'll find is at the very top, you have three categories: early childhood, elementary, middle, and high. There's also that category that says other, that's national board certification. That's a supplement. That's something beyond making the choices within each of those levels. It's a requirement within the grant that a district choose something from early childhood, something from elementary, and something from middle and high. Those somethings, by the way, could be two things. It's probably not wise to choose all and spread all of the providers too thin, probably, but it is possible to choose more than one of those, but it's a requirement that at least one be chosen. On the left-hand side in that column, you'll see the characteristics of comprehensive literacy. That is a necessity also for this grant, is that we do offer programs that have characteristics of comprehensive literacy. You can find more on page 24 of the RFA about these characteristics. This list is sort of a shorthand for those others. You'll notice that they have been coded with the providers. The only one that hasn't is the one from CCLD, the Adolescent Literacy Project. We do have that information. It just wasn't available by the time the RFA was released. That's why that column has not been filled out, but it is there, and we can make that information available as well. So typically in the past, at this point in the game, when districts are making their decision to apply for this grant, they're looking at this matrix and choosing the provider that they want. The reason we're here today, though, is for that exception of people who decide they want to choose a provider that meets their needs that doesn't fall within this matrix. If that's the case, then we do have to make a submission for vetting. So you do have to go through the process of evaluating evidence and then submitting that for vetting to say why it's important that you have this additional program instead of something else. That has to be turned in by February 20th, 2020. You would also send that to KDE RFP at education.ky.gov, just like you would send any questions. So let's think about what that looks like, but also where you can find all of these resources. So evidence-based practices can be found at this website. And again, I gave you a Google search in case you want to just type this in to search KDE evidence-based practice or evidence-based practices. If you go there, you're going to find the website pretty easily, or you can use that web address. On that resources page, for instance, you'll find supporting materials. Things like in general materials that are going to give you a lot of general information, that are going to give you a glossary of terms, frequently asked questions. You're also going to have resources for finding evidence. I'm going to show you all these on the website as well, but in there you'll find links to, for instance, how to use What Works Clearinghouse in particular. A lot of people use What Works Clearinghouse and may not be using it to a very sufficient level or sophisticated level. There's more guidance around that, and also around databases and clearinghouses in general. And then the last category there under supporting materials is about tools for evaluating evidence. And that's probably the thing that you're most interested in if you've reached this part of the grant and you want to apply for an additional program. You want to see those tools for evaluating evidence, because that's what's going to lead you to that narrative that I talked about a few minutes ago to submit on February 20th. Those tools, under those tools, if you looked for Empowered by Evidence, Reviewing Evidence under ESSA, and there's the link to it, you'll find some different options of things that you can do to evaluate evidence. Our guidance is to evaluate it using the tool that's there and to write a narrative. That's option 2 at that link under Tools for Evaluating Evidence. What you'll find are the compliance requirements, and then option 2 offers a narrative. Now, what's nice about this, I'm going to skip ahead just one, is that there's a sample narrative. I want you to notice there are color coding marks inside this, but if I go back, you'll find that it's required this part of the documentation. So there has to be a study citation in APA format. So you have to know, you have to evaluate a study, at least one. There also has to be in this narrative a discussion of the study and its findings, a discussion of the local context, a discussion of stakeholder input, and an estimation of the ESSA evidence level. So when I go back to this sample narrative, you'll notice that it is, the legend tells you that it's, for instance, a study citation APA format, and that's in yellow, and it's, it's done for you. The green, the next one that shows up, is that discussion of stakeholder input. So this explains that the study was reviewed by our advisory leadership team who made this recommendation, etc., showing not just that the person who wrote this narrative is making this decision, but rather the stakeholders that are involved had an input based on looking at the evidence, looking at the study. So a really good thing to do, and something that a lot of people do when they turn these narratives in for maybe their turnaround plan or a CSIP, is to go ahead and color code them yourselves. It does help you see what you've done and that you've accomplished what you need to, but it also helps the person reviewing it to see it. Something else that makes most people feel pretty good about this form of request is that this is just a narrative. It's just a very short narrative that gets to the point and explains what you need to explain. I know that, like for the grant, you'll have maybe a 20, 25 page narrative. This is just a short narrative that you'll turn in, basically like this sample. Now, it doesn't have to be just like this, but this is a really good example of what it could look like. You'll want to move from research to narrative, so you probably do want to go through this step-by-step review and analysis that you'll find under the Empowered by Evidence. There's an actual protocol that you'll go through that's going to ask you to take a look at specific things. It's going to ask you some questions that you'll fill out. You'll notice inside that there is some examples. Note that that list is not exhaustive or comprehensive. It's just examples that are provided. No two evaluations look alike, so be specific when you're writing your own evaluation. Remember too, a lot of times you're talking about your own local context, your own stakeholders. Read and annotate a study in its entirety before you start with the instrument. Sometimes we like to try to fill something out as we go, as we're reading, but it's going to be important to make sure that the study you're actually looking at offers what it is that you think it's going to need to offer the evidence to support it. So you want to go through and annotate that study first. Once you get to the instrument, you will see gray boxes. It's going to ask you to put in certain things. You can enter them there, and then when you're done, you have this complete instrument that's going to help you write that narrative. All of that goes to inform the narrative. Again, there's that sample narrative. The instrument that we were just talking about is going to help offer you the guidance to write this. Again, some of you are very familiar with this and you've written many of these narratives and some haven't, but there is guidance on the website around those. I'm getting ready to take you to the website and show you what those look like. The other beautiful part of the website, so this is under School Improvements website on KDE, you'll find that there are other webinars and training opportunities that are available. If you did a Google search of KDE Empowered by Evidence and you scroll down a little bit, you're going to find these webinars and trainings. What we're offering today is a brief overview. These webinars are going to take you a little deeper, quite a bit deeper into the why and the how of looking at evidence. Again, If you are going to submit to offer an additional program or to contract with a different provider that's outside the matrix provided in the RFA, that's due to KDE by February 20th. You would send your narrative to kderfp@education.ky.gov. Now, I am going to share a different screen because I want you to be able to see. I'm sorry if this takes me just a second to get this, but I want to be able to show you the, I'm going to have to stop sharing and start over. I'm going to share what I have on Google Chrome. Okay. So we've been talking, I made a lot of references to our website. First of all, I talked about the competitive grants page from KDE. If you were to Google KDE competitive grants, this is the page that you'll find. You also can go directly to the website. There are other ways to search it. That's just kind of an easy one. But the first one you see is for fiscal year 20, Kentucky Comprehensive Literacy Round 1 RFA. Round 1 basically means that in this round, non-circle or non-striving readers districts are the only ones that are eligible to apply, and other eligibility pieces are listed in the RFA. For instance, you have to have a high school that is at 65% or higher with free and reduced lunch. So that's just to be eligible, you have to meet those requirements. What you would do is just click on KyCL Round 1 RFA. You can find out the information. We're also doing technical assistance specific to the RFA to give you just general information about that and also to talk with the providers around the state. And we've had 2 already. We're going to have one on the January 28th, which is tomorrow. Now, if you're listening to this later on, that tomorrow won't make any sense, but you can always click on our technical assistance calendar to see other opportunities for technical assistance. The general technical assistance that we're doing around the RFA is going to be recorded and put on this website very soon. So that's how you find the RFA. Now let's get to the evidence-based practices. If I were to go to this website, if I were to Google, for instance, evidence-based practices, KDE, this is what I would find. And this is under school improvement, evidence-based practices. This is something that's updated very regularly, and I want to show you some things I was talking about a few minutes ago. First of all, under supporting materials, you have 3 main areas, and these are super important and super helpful. First of all, you have your general materials where you're going to find guidance around using evidence and why it's important so that we can strengthen our decisions around education and our investments that we're getting ready to make. We want to be very wise and careful with money, but also we want to be able to make the biggest impact on student achievement. I'm going to go ahead and click on this just so you can see what we're looking at. But when you click on this one, for instance, you get a PDF. Some of these may download, they may be in different formats, but this is just a guidance document that's going to offer you, it comes in different parts, but it also has step-by-step. Now, this is specific to implementing a program, not necessarily to our grant. The next one is talking about ESSA evidence levels. So it is going to be something that's important that you understand where your study, when you're looking at a study, where it falls in this evidence level. For instance, it can be strong, moderate, promising, or demonstrates a rationale. So it's level 1 to level 4. You can see across this chart, For instance, you're going to have to know what kind of study design you're talking about. Is it an experimental? Is it a correlation study? So that's going to make some determinations on the levels right off the bat. For instance, if it's a correlation study with statistical controls, then it falls within this level 3 promising evidence. But it also needs to show these things as well, these favorable effects, these other effects. The top 2 levels for strong or moderate also include these databases and clearinghouses and sample size and overlap. So for it to be strong, it has to have all of these things in place, to be moderate and so forth. So if you're making an argument, you want to try to make the strongest argument possible. It's one of the reasons the guidance earlier said, make sure to go through your study and annotate and read all of that first before you begin filling out this instrument, because you don't want to go through really trying to fill all of this out and then realize that you don't have a very strong study. You want to make sure that you've addressed all of that first. Okay. That was the evidence levels. You also have a glossary of terms. I'm not going to click on that, but that makes sense why that would be in there. And also frequently asked questions, which is very helpful especially when you get deeper into things and you need to really think about the nuance of things. That's where you can go. Also, the second group under supporting materials is about resources for finding evidence. We oftentimes go to What Works Clearinghouse and we see something listed and we take it at face value without really looking at the study, first of all, or really understanding what they're saying. So there is a user guide that's specific just to What Works Clearinghouse that could be very helpful to you. There's also this second link about clearinghouses and databases in general that you're able to access, and also open access to journals and education. We're asking you to look at studies, so the folks who put this together were actually very kind to say, here are some places you can go to search for studies to really help you find good materials. This last one under supporting materials is actually tools for evaluating. And this is where we were talking earlier about filling out the instrument. If you looked at this one, reviewing evidence under ESSA, I'm going to click on that. This one is and I hope this shares okay, but that one opens as a PDF. And I may have to stop sharing and share this so you can see it. I'm going to do that just to make sure everybody can see this. It's a little bit clunky when we do that, but I think it'll be really important for you to see it. I think I'm sharing my entire, okay. It's moving just a little bit slowly. Okay. When you go to that link, this is the quote-unquote instrument that we're talking about under Elevating Evidence, Empowered by Evidence. This is reviewing evidence under ESSA. And you do have some introductory materials. You also have a lot of those links that I've talked about already, like the ESSA evidence levels. They're also reattached in here, so you can take a look at those. And what you'll notice is that when I talked about filling in those gray boxes, this is sort of a nice feature. It's just a way for you to collect that study overview just by simply clicking and entering text, which is really nice. It's going to ask you the questions that you're going to need to know to write the narrative. So while I'm not going to go through all of the pieces of that, I did want to show you this. It's going to ask you to think about certain things. For instance, how many people or groups of people participated in this study? That's a very important question, but what if we forgot to look at that? What if we forgot to include that? What if only 5 people were a part of this study, maybe 2 groups of 4 people were a part of that study. That's not a lot to base our decisions on. So this instrument helps ask the kinds of questions that are necessary to make really good decisions. Okay. So that's probably one of the most important pieces that you'll see. I'm going to close that. Hopefully we'll be able to go right back to the website. When you get back to the website here, this Empowered by Evidence, Reviewing Evidence under ESSA, that's the instrument we were just talking about. And in there, you're going to find those questions and that help along as you go. You'll also find some other pieces. If you were actually looking at meta-analyses, if you were looking at, I'm not even going to go into all those tools, but you can go much deeper into that. But I did want to show you this as some additional learning. There are webinars and training opportunities that are much better than this one, that go much deeper into looking at studies and looking at evidence-based practices. For instance, this one about evaluating evidence, you have a webinar, you can look at the PowerPoint, the transcript, and other materials. You also have, this is also very helpful, just looking at how to use databases and clearinghouses. This one talks about study design, understanding education statistics, evaluating intervention impact. Some of these may be important right now. Some may be important to you later on as you're working, whether you're a part of the Kentucky Comprehensive Literacy Grant or not. So I wanted to make sure that all of this was available to you, that you had the opportunity to go to this website to get the materials that you needed. If you are interested in choosing a provider, first of all, if you're applying for the Kentucky Comprehensive Literacy Grant, and you do want to make a choice outside of the matrix listed on page 6 of the RFA, then this is the process you would need to go through. Looking at the evidence and reviewing that evidence under ESSA requirements. Again, we thank you very much for joining us today. If you have questions, you can send it to kderfp@education.ky.gov. And again, the deadline for submitting would be on February 20th, 2020. Thank you very much.